Good morning to you all. My name is Maria Rita. I'm the Executive Director of Anjos Brasil, a non-profit organization to foster angel investment. I welcome you all to the 6th edition of Café com Homus, an initiative of Anjos Brasil and Israel Trade and Investment, which bring big names in the Israeli innovation ecosystems to share their vision on issues related to venture capital and startups, in addition to discussing the potential of business and investment between Brazil and Israel. If you want to know the reasons for this beautiful name, Café com Homus, I invite you to watch the last event, in which we received Eugene Candel. It's on Anjos do Brasil YouTube channel. You can go there, there's a lot of interesting stuff. But we're not here to speak about food or names. We are here to talk about innovation. And for that, we have the honor to receive Inbal Arieli. She will be properly presented in a minute. I just want to say one thing, that I admire no people that are considered a guru as Inbal is. They are always nice and humble. In the Founder Studio, a project that shares a mosaic of diverse role models, she says, "The tech ecosystem is my sandbox. They are my playmates." As some of you already know, I studied philosophy. So for me, much that is in the concepts that Inbal presents to us in her books and works is contemplated in this delicate and gentle phrase. Thank you, Inbal, for those insights. I'm touched by this, but let's go back. Anjos do Brasil and Israel Trade and Investment had a long partnership. We organize investors' missions to Israel, events like this, and a lot of connections between entrepreneurs and investors. We are certain that there is a huge potential for business that adds values for both our countries. To also welcome you, talk a little bit about the works Health Trade does, and to introduce our guest, I will give you Sahi Hash, the head of the Israeli Economic and Trade Mission to São Paulo. It's up to you, Sahi.
Thank you, Maria Rita. Shalom, everyone. Bom dia here. Achar tzorayim tovim. We are very happy to be here again with you with this Café com Homus initiative. And I will start with a short introduction of who we are. So we are part of the Israeli Ministry of Economy and Industry. And we are here to basically foster trade between Israel and Brazil. We do this by connecting people, connecting companies, sharing knowledge, and also improving the infrastructure, the trade infrastructure between the countries. And as you may know, we have in place both a bilateral agreement with Mercosur. We have 2 R&D agreements between the Israeli Innovation Authority and FINEP and Embrapi here in Brazil. And we have a special program which is called Scale Up in Brazil, which is supporting tech companies that really want to penetrate Brazil in the most serious manner. With this, I would like to invite our very special guest for today, Inbal Arieli. Inbal is the founder of Synthesis, a global leadership assessment firm, and she's the author of Chutzpah, Why Israel is a Hub of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. She was born and raised on Homus and Chutzpah. She fostered entrepreneur skills during her mandatory military service, serving as a lieutenant at the Unit 8200, the Israeli Defense Forces Elite Intelligence Corps. And after completing her military duties, and for the past 20 years, she's embraced leading executive roles in flourishing Israeli tech sector and has founded a series of programs of innovators where she currently holds board seats. With this, I would like to invite Inbal to take the Zoom floor. The Zoom is all yours.
Thank you very much, Sahi, and thank you, Maria Rita, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm very happy to be here with you. I wish I could be in person in Brazil, but I sure hope that sometime soon this will be possible. The skies will open, and we could all meet in person back again, like in the good times. But for now, I'm glad we could be able of meeting with the Zoom platform. And like Maria Rita said, yes, I've been part of the Israeli tech ecosystem sandbox and playground for over more than 20 years. And I completely think of it as a very active and vibrant playground, and where a lot of creativity and fun and collaboration happens at the same time. And I'd like to share with you more anecdotes and more of my view about that. But first, I think that what we would do, we will just make sure that we're all aligned and try to understand what does that mean? What is this playground or amusement park that we refer to as the Israeli tech ecosystem looks like as of 2021? And so if we can move, please, Gabriela, to the next slide. Thank you. We'll start with, and don't be scared with all this data and information that appears here. We'll go block by block and actually create the overall holistic view of the ecosystem. So think of yourselves as birds now, and we're taking a bird's eye view of all the different elements and components that are part of the Israeli tech ecosystem, again, as of 2021. So the first thing and the first element that you all know is that Israel has the highest density of startups in the world, right? This is something that has been quoted and mentioned already for the past at least 10 years since the book Startup Nation came out. And it's still true. We still have the highest numbers of startups per capita. In the past 3 years, we actually see a slight decline, okay, in the decrease in the amount of new startups, but it's actually for good reasons. So we'll get to that in a second. The trend is of opening less new startups, but yet we still have the highest number of startups per capita in the world, and there are a lot of startups here. And if, I don't know, 20 years ago when I started my career, the dream of any mother and father in Israel was for their son or daughter to be a physician or an engineer. Today, it's definitely to be in the high-tech ecosystem. This has become really the main engine of creativity and growth here economically in Israel. But it's not just because of those startups. So one element is this early stage entrepreneurial bubbling, okay, that is present here at high density and high volume. But that's not enough. So having an entrepreneurial mindset and one which is really driven to technology is good, but it's not enough. Another element that we see in the Israeli tech ecosystem is the box that you have actually under the blue one on the top, is the fact that Israel of 2021 attracts more venture capital per capita than any other country in the world. Again, it's proportionally to the population, but still it's in high numbers. And actually, when you look at Europe, for example, together in some of the Europe as a continent in high tech, in some of the industries, Israel in absolute number overpasses it. Or Canada and Japan in venture capital investments in tech, Israel in absolute number overpasses them. And so in 2020, there was another record broken. Every past year in the past decade has broken a record. And in 2020, despite the COVID situation in the world, in tech ecosystems, we know that it has not stopped the tech energy in the world, and over $10 billion were invested in venture capital in tech companies, Israeli tech companies in 2020, over $10 billion. Actually, 2021 would probably break that record again, because the first half of 2021, and you have that number in small on the slide there, is actually even higher than 2020. So the numbers are increasing in terms of investment, and 85% of the investment in venture capital, in professional funding for tech in the Israeli tech ecosystem originates from abroad, is not Israeli money. So 85% or 85 cents of every dollar which is invested in high tech here in Israel actually is not domestic money. Most of the funds used to come from the US, but not anymore. Today we see many funds coming from the US, but we also see them coming from other markets, including Brazil, by the way. There's, as you probably know, more and more investors from Brazil that are interested in what's happening here in the Israeli tech ecosystem. So we have a lot of startups, and we do have a very mature funding ecosystem for these startups. But that's not all. We also have a strategic, if you want, looking into the future, a strategic path of a very positive potential of even more growth of this ecosystem. If you look at the bottom chart, the bars at the bottom, they represent the percentage of investment in R&D from the GDP. And this is a number that actually is predictive for the future, because of course, the more investment we do in R&D today, the more potential we have in the future to actually mature this R&D. Israel and South Korea for the past 4 or 5 years have been leading this chart globally and switching positions first and second every year, but they're similar in the number. It's just a little less than 5% of the GDP is actually investment in both South Korea and in Israel in R&D, which is very high. But there is one difference, and one very critical difference between the way South Korea is actually investing those R&D funds and the way it's done in Israel. And the main difference is the source of these fundings. In South Korea, most of the funding, over 80% of the funding, is governmental funding, which is the government is incentivizing and funding the R&D in various ways. In Israel, over 80% of that funding is actually private funding. Private funding, which is, and this is not venture capital funding, this is now investment in R&D, pure investment in R&D. Most of this funding comes from the multinationals that operate here in Israel, very large organizations. We'll talk about them in a second, but they're the one leading that investment in R&D, which means that a lot of people are trained in these places. Those are the entrepreneurs to be in the future. Now, a lot of startups, more than enough funding, okay, for all of them currently here in Israel, and a high level of investment in R&D. But there's also a new trend, or a strengthened trend, if you want, of growth of Israeli companies. So if 10 years ago, when the book Startup Nation came out, the whole conversation was about these early stage startups, the innovation that comes out of Israel, and the collaboration that these early stage startups do with other different types of receptors in the business world. Today, we see that there are many more Israeli companies that are actually growing, becoming market leaders in their space, global market leaders in their space. Often they will actually purchase other smaller startups here in Israel and abroad. And so the two main indicators for that, one is the fact that Israel today has the highest representation on NASDAQ, NASDAQ being the most professional trading platform for tech companies in the world. And the fact that so many Israeli companies are being traded there, almost 100 by now, second only to China and the US. I mean, and think of it, it's right with the proportion of the size of the country. We have seen lately over 50 SPACs. SPACs are these new ways of taking a company public. It's a faster way. It's very trendy now in financial markets. And Israelis, like Israelis, are actually, the first to adopt a trend. And so many more Israeli companies are actually becoming public traded companies now, which means they're reaching a certain growth and maturity in their lives, and becoming less of a startup and more of a mature company. And if that's not enough, then you see all these unicorns here in the middle of the slide. So if in 2013 we had only one unicorn in Israel, a unicorn being a multi-billion-dollar valued private company, so not a public traded company, a private company which valuation is over $1 billion, meaning it's a very successful one. So in 2013, we had only one. In 2019, we had 18. In 2019, 2021, we have over, I think, over 40, or well, we can do the math here, or over 50 maybe, unicorns in the Israeli ecosystem. Israeli companies valued over $1 billion companies, private companies. Big companies, big market leaders. Now, all of that is part of the growth in tech ecosystems in general in the world. But we definitely can say by now that Israel is not just an innovative startup nation, it's definitely taking a position of a leading ecosystem also in mature companies, despite the size of the country. Another thing that is very interesting is the fact that innovation in Israel is very diversified. So if you look at the chart in the middle and this innovation index by Bloomberg or other indexes by the World Economic Forum, Israel is always in the top 10 countries. And actually some of the countries above Israel are quite surprising. So let's take Switzerland, for example. It may be not the first thing you think of Switzerland as a country, them being extremely innovative, but the fact they're there is because of their pharmaceutical industry, which creates a lot of innovation, which is measured by number of patents and number of scientists. In Israel, we actually see that innovation is not focused in one main vertical. It's actually diversified and very rich in the types of industries and verticals it touches. When the Israeli tech ecosystem started, we always said that it's all about necessity and needs that we have here in Israel. So cybersecurity and agriculture and water, right, became industries where there was Israeli innovation, which originally tried to answer our own domestic needs, but then realized there is a global market relevant for them. But that's not the case anymore at all. We have today very successful Israeli companies in fintech, financial technologies, definitely not because of a need that exists here in Israel, it's a tiny market. We have very successful companies in e-commerce and retail tech, in travel tech, in sports technology, in food technology, although, you know, as you probably know from your Israeli friends, we have more than enough good food here in Israel to satisfy everyone. So it's not out of necessity, it comes from a different motivation. And that motivation is that the skills that are relevant for innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship can actually be brought in a variety of industries. And we are not trying to find or to start with specific expertise. We can come back to that later. In addition to that, like I said before, there are over 430 multinationals, the world's largest companies, that have decided, for obvious reasons, to have an R&D office in Israel. So the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples of the world, Coca-Cola, I don't know, just almost any global brand you would think of, have an R&D office in Israel, hiring an Israeli tech talent, and actually extracting from them, if you want, or leveraging their skills in technology, which are different from the ones you would find in India, where most of them also have R&D offices, or in the Scandinavian countries, where most of these multinationals also have R&D offices. Here, they're looking for something else. And all of that together, in a country of 9 million people, right? Tiny when we think of it compared to Brazil, of course, with a workforce of 4 million people and only 400,000. So 10% of the Israeli workforce, that's it, 400,000 people, that's the number, are my team players, teammates in this sandbox, in this playground. That's it, 400,000 people. These 400,000 people are actually responsible for 15% of the GDP and almost 50% of the exports of Israel today. And this is one of the reasons. And they pay, by the way, 25% of the income tax in Israel is paid by these 10% of high-tech employees, investors, founders, all the different types of people who are employed in the tech ecosystem. In my view, okay, and we started saying at the beginning that I like to think of it like a playground, I'm mostly fascinated by these people. So the numbers are great and the achievements are extremely impressive. But if we think about the future of Israel and we think about future of economies in other places in the world, we also need to think about the human capital and the skill set that people need today and will need in the future, so that we can actually ensure that our economy would remain relevant and would continue to grow in the future. And this brings us to Chutzpah. So Chutzpah, the book, is actually showcasing the tech ecosystem through the skill set and through the stories of the people behind it. And with that, Gabriela, we can actually go back to a regular screen where I could also see, yes, you can just stop the presentation. Thank you. And so I myself, I'm a tech entrepreneur. I'm also investing here in Israeli companies. I'm, like we said, you heard before, I've founded several programs for innovators, for entrepreneurs here in the Israeli tech ecosystem. But I'm always mostly fascinated by the human perspective. And with that, Maria, I know that we wanted to start a conversation. And I'm happy, of course, to address any question you have.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Now, Luciana is going to join me here because we have a lot of questions to you. So please, Gabriela, put Luciana also here with us in the stage.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with a question. These numbers always impress me a lot. They grow every year. This is a reality. And since we are going to Israel taking investors delegations since 2015, I hear a lot why you have all these impressive numbers. And most of the people tell me that the army is one of the main points that led Israel to be a part of the most innovative places in the world. But I know you have a broader view, bringing elements related to education of children. So could you please tell us a little more about this different view that you have?
Yes, sure. Thank you for this question. So you're completely right. When asked what are the reasons for why Israel or the tech ecosystem here has become so successful, we typically talk about the fact that Israel is a country of immigrants, and immigrants are entrepreneurs and create pockets of entrepreneurship everywhere they go. So this is one reason. Used to be. Okay, in the past, in the early days of Israel. The second fact is that in the early 1990s, the Israeli government realized that they had to invest, just like South Korea and other countries are doing today, in the Israeli tech and to boost it through different programs, which they did some 30 years ago. And that did influence what's happening, what we see today, but that's also history. And then the third thing is always the military. And I myself also served in the military for more than 5 years. I was an officer, a lieutenant in 8200, which within the Israeli military is considered to be the hotbed of innovation and where many entrepreneurs in tech come from. And I agree that the military plays a very important role in the uniqueness of the Israeli ecosystem. However, none of us are born 18 and join the military just, learning to walk and then join the military. And when we join the military, we bring with us, like just any 18-year-old individual and person, a toolbox, a collection of elements that we've either developed or were taught or that create who we are, again, as individuals. And in my view, the reason why Israel is such a successful, and I'll say even more than that, for the future will be even more relevant, is because of the Israeli society and because of some of the elements that exist in the day-to-day life in Israel, which are easily shown through the eyes of children growing up here in Israel. But it's of course relevant to anyone. Bottom line, I think that the way Israelis grow up influences a lot their soft skills, and mostly those skills that are critical for creativity and innovation. And then when they grow up fostering these skills, and I can give you some examples, they develop them, they strengthen them, they foster them. When brought to the military, to a place like 8200, which is the Israeli intelligence unit in the military, and are told, this is your now playground. We need a solution for X. Tell us what you think we should do. At the age of 18, it's like an amusement park, okay? And they start using their creativity, which they've always been told to use. They challenge the assumptions around them because they were taught as children to ask and challenge, okay? They're not afraid of doing mistakes because again, as children, they just saw that even if you're wrong, it's not a big deal. You just try again, and so forth and so on. There's a whole set of elements and skills that come into play, and that's how all these miraculous technologies, disruptive technologies, are born here. So in my view, it starts in the childhood, and this is what's unique in Israel, but it's not limited to societies, that embedded at such an early age. I actually think that, just like I said, it's like muscles, and you have to practice and strengthen them. And you can do that at later phases also. It's a matter of awareness and intent and practice.
Amazing. Thank you, Inbal. It's been a great experience to hear these inputs from you. And first, we want to hear some examples that you mentioned. But my question is, where did you first see this parallel between a life cycle of a startup business and Israeli childhood? And it's possible that aspiring entrepreneurs, people that want to open their startup, take some life lessons from these stages and open successful business, even for Brazilians. I want to hear your point of view on that.
Sure. So yes, like I told you in my past, in my career, I founded and started several programs for tech entrepreneurs. And as part of all these accelerators or innovation labs, they have a lot of different names. We always try to show to these early stage entrepreneurs the different stages of a company, of a product, of the process that is ahead of them. And I did that while I was a young parent. Okay, I have 3 boys. Today they are 19, 16, and 12. But 10 years ago, they were much younger. And so these two parts of my life, okay, which of course were in parallel, I constantly saw the resemblance. And let me give you an example. So my favorite example is actually of my own childhood. At the age of 4, we moved from Israel, where I was born, to Israeli parents, and we moved to Geneva, Switzerland. My dad was working for El Al back then. He was head of security there, chief of security in Switzerland. And at the age of 4, I spoke only Hebrew. And I was brought to the International School of Geneva, where you can imagine Geneva back then was the home of the UN, diplomats from all over the world. And I spoke only Hebrew. And the first days at school, they let a teacher, a kindergarten teacher, onboard me, help me orient. One of my first childhood memories is from this beautiful, beautiful kindergarten. I mean, if only you could imagine the difference. So I grew up in Be'er Sheva before that, which is in the south of Israel, for those of you who know it. For those of you who don't, Be'er Sheva is the capital city of the Negev, of the Israeli desert. It's in the desert, and it's hot, and it's yellowish. And in the 70s, it wasn't a very, very well-developed city, if I may say. From there to Geneva, okay, Switzerland. I mean, just imagine the difference. And so I was fascinated by everything around me. But one of the first days, she took me by her hand in the break of school, of playground, of playtime, to a slide, you know, a typical standard slide that kids from all over the world play with. And it was very familiar to me. I knew exactly what to do. And there was a kid in front of me. And again, I didn't speak French or English. And she did like this. And so I paused, I stopped. I understood I had to wait. The kid climbed up the ladder. She smiled at me. So I did the same. I climbed up the ladder. And then she did like this again. And I stopped. The kid sat on their butt and, you know, slide down the slide. She smiled at me again. I did the same. Extremely pleasant, great fun for a 4-year-old. For any of you who have visited Israel or have family in Israel, let me assure you, this is not what you will see at a typical Israeli playground with 4-year-old kids playing. This is not how it looks like. Now, what happened in Switzerland was that the teacher, she taught me, she guided me, she instructed me, without saying even that there's a way, right? There's a best practice. This is how we do things. We climb up the ladder, we go down the slide. And it makes sense to all of us as adults. If you'll go to an Israeli playground, you will see kids going up the ladder and down the slide, but you will also see the opposite. And sometimes you'll see it at the same time. One will go up the ladder planning on going down the slide. Another one will climb up the slide. Boom, what now? Another one will just stand in the middle and spread their legs like this for other kids to go in between them, like a bridge. Someone will jump from the slide. A lot of things will happen simultaneously. Okay, a lot of noise, a lot of running, but it works. The kids are having fun. No one is telling them exactly how to use this slide, okay? Statistically, there are no more injuries in Israeli playgrounds than in other places in the world because they figured it out by themselves. They resolve these conflicts. They find creative way of enjoying the structure of a slide and a ladder. And they are mostly not bound to restrictions and limitations and constraints that we adults like to put on children, because we look for control and, you know, order and simplicity, but their mind is completely different. And this is just an example. Now, how is that relevant to a startup or a business leader? Not even in a startup, it is very relevant, because if you want to stay innovative, regardless of your stage, okay? But if one of the goals is to be innovative, if all you do is to go back and rely on best practices, the chance of being innovative are very, very, very low. If you want to improve processes and you always say, oh, but there's a reason why they did it in the past, let's follow that. Again, best practice, think of even that term. If it's the best practice, why would I even try to change it? It's best. But best practices are best for a certain moment until we change them and make them even better, right? So this is an example of how I actually see the resemblance. And of course, there's much more to it. And if you think of a business cycle from an exploration phase where you explore a problem and you try to better understand it, into validating that it is actually a problem and you may have a good solution for it, into actually becoming very efficient, okay, and cost effective, capable to scale, and then eventually to innovate again and to improve again. So these 5 stages of a cycle, of a project, of a product, of a business, I actually see them in the Israeli different steps of childhood. And I do think that there's a lot we can learn if we look at these principles and how they're embedded in Israeli childhood and just do the right adaptation to grown-ups, to young professionals, and to the business world.
Wonderful, I really love it. It's connected to a concept that you bring in your book. I don't know if I will say the word right in Hebrew, it's balagan, but it's madness. It's madness. And I think that this is, we are going to go back to this a little later, but there is a lot of relation between Israel and Brazil in this concept. And there is a very big value in not knowing all the answers, because if you want to innovate, and you think you know everything and have all the answers, how can you do that? And to add a little more about this way of making innovation, I would like to talk a little bit with you about diversity. In my personal view, diversity and excellence are closely linked. But at the same time, it's often argued that the focus of all of us when we are talking about the entrepreneur ecosystem should be only on merit. And for me, it's a tricky question. It's like having all the answers before of that. So what I would like you is, how can we connect to these 2 points? How we know how we can access merit for innovation? Are we still using old concepts from the traditional economics when we talked about that? Could you please help us to understand this a little better?
So let me make sure I understand your question. You're asking about how to address diversity, assuming, of course, diversity is a good thing, a positive trait and thing, and how to address it in a way. Is it based on merit, or should it be based on other things?
Exactly that. In other terms, is excellence overrated?
Okay, so I think first it's a question: is diversity really such a good thing? Okay, now obviously I do think it is. And diversity, by the way, in many different ways. I think that one of the beautiful things, and I've mentioned before about the human capital in Israel, the fact that expertise is less overrated than in other places in the world, but the mobility or ability to transition from one industry to another is more typical here. Now, how is that connected? It's because, in a sense, and let's go back to the military. I'll connect everything together. When we're 16 and a half, my 16-year-old Daniel got 2 weeks ago a letter from the army. He's 16. Okay, he got a letter from the army saying that he, on February, I think 12th or something like that, he has his first, we call it tzav rishon, first order. He has his first interview day in the military. In February, he will be 16 and a half. On that day, he comes to a set of interviews in the military. He's 16 and a half. The only thing that interests him now in life, 2 things. In his case, girls and soccer. Okay, and he's not even in Brazil. It's Israeli soccer. It's not even good soccer like in Brazil. And so, what military? He's not even graduating from high school. The fact that the Israeli military is based on extremely young people that they don't have a CV, they don't have relevant background, they don't have past accomplishments. I sold this company, I grew the company from X to Z, I have experience in the healthcare industry, 0, right? They don't have a CV, they can show nothing. The maximum they can show is what they chose to major in high school, but that doesn't say much about a 16-year-old child. It definitely doesn't say much about a 16-year-old girl. If she's not majoring in mathematics or physics, it definitely doesn't say that she's not capable of. It may even say that she didn't choose that because there weren't enough girls in that class. Okay, and the Israeli military now needs to screen these people and to find the right fit. Who fits which profession at the age of 16 and a half. Now, it's not a simple task because they will be then trained for a few months and onto their jobs, extremely responsible positions in the military. They will be literally responsible for, the life and death of people and for multi-billion-dollar tech systems like the Iron Dome. Who's pressing the button on the Iron Dome for when we have missile attacks are 19-year-old kids. And so that concept, which is very different from what we're used to in the business world, by necessity this time, actually is a great floor, a great stage for diversity. Because you have no other possibility but to eliminate a lot of factors and focus on the individual. That exists in the military. I cannot say that it exists exactly the same way in the tech world or in business world in general in Israel, but at least the notion exists. And so creating in the military and having the experience of having these, and in a society that is so diversified, we have over 70 different nationalities here in Israel, people from so many different places. My mother came from Poland, my father came from Egypt. Trust me, they didn't have a lot in common. Okay, they were very, very different. They were born in different homes. And so bringing all that together creates a normality of focusing on the person. Now, I think that lately we've learned that it's not just a matter of diversity between men and women. It's also a matter of diversity of age. So, and again, the military is a great example for that. You have people who are in their 40s, very few, and most of the people are in their teen years, 18, 19-year-olds, and they work together. And that connection actually, brings a better result than having a team of young people led by a team of more experienced people. In the book, there is a chapter where the former head of NSA, the Israeli NSA, 8200, says that he actually, that's what he loved in being the head of the 80-100, is of actually having all these young people solving all the problems and all the tasks that he brought them. He said, I didn't know the answers. I gave a direction, I gave a problem, and it was just incredible to see these young people solving it. So it's a diversity of age, it's a diversity of gender, of course. It's a diversity also in backgrounds and industries and knowledge. And in one of my accelerators, I insisted on being the opposite of a niche accelerator. So instead of being a cyber accelerator or healthcare accelerator, where you really focus on the industry, I insisted on bringing startups from extremely different worlds. Healthcare together with automotive, fashion together with food technology. And you put 20 people from different worlds around a table, and it's incredible to see how they actually improve one another in the way they think. So diversity is critical in all of these different ways of looking at it. I personally believe that by role modeling, you can actually attract the optimal right fit when you're looking for candidates. So depending on the case, of course, but by role modeling women CFOs, it's easier to bring more women to be CFOs, but those who are interested in that. Okay, and not just, you know, I'm less of a believer of having seats for different types of people. I think that if we do the right role modeling work, by itself, it creates a very positive screening into the pipeline. I hope I answered your question. It's a multi-layered question.
You were great, but I think that Luciana has one more question for you at least, and then I will start doing the questions that are on our chat.
Yes, it's amazing. And I also saw that you have an initiative called Founder Studio, right? Where you foster these role models for people to understand it. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's a great contribution to the ecosystem and to diversity with merit. So I think it's very, very important. But my question is different. I wanted to hear about your book. Why did you decide to write Chutzpah? What do you hope the readers will take away from it? Tell us a little bit more.
Okay, so in October or November 2013, I was on stage in the US, and I was asked the exact same question you asked me before: why Israel is so successful in tech. And the interviewer, you know, was waiting for the standard. It was an audience that knew a little bit about Israel and the tech ecosystem, but not so much. And he expected the typical standard answer I gave you about the 3 elements. And then I said, but I also think it's about how children grow up in Israel. And then when we talked a little bit about it. And when I walked off stage, people start, you know, thanking me and coming to me, and one after the other, I got this question of where can they read more about soft skills and childhood and the connection to business. And I said, I don't know where you can read more. It's in my head. True story, by the way. And by the 5th person who approached me with the same question, asking where can I read more, I said, you know what, you have to wait. I'm writing a book about it. And that night, it was in Napa Valley, California. I came back to the hotel. It was already, I don't know, midnight, 1 a.m. Called my husband and told him, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a book. And it's something I never planned to do. I've never written, or I didn't have aspirations to publish a book, but I realized that there's a very unique lens. There's a very unique point of view that I found. And that point of view is not just about, well, obviously it's about Israel and the success of the tech ecosystem. And as a proud Israeli, a proud tech entrepreneur in the Israeli ecosystem, and someone who really cares about my country and I really believe in it, that's one part of it. But it's not that. It's actually a more humanistic, universal, futuristic approach. Because the different elements that exist in the Israeli society and the Israeli economy are very unique to Israel in many ways, including the military, by the way. The way the Israeli military operates is very unique to Israel. And so telling the story through the lens of the military, it could be interesting, but it's limiting. It's very limiting. And also, we spoke about diversity. Not all parts of Israeli society join the military for different reasons, and yet we do want them to be part of the tech ecosystem in Israel. So I, as an Israeli who's thinking about the future of her economy, I don't want to limit the story just to that. And so Chutzpah is actually about the soft skills for the future, the ones that are relevant to any country in the world. Thankfully, the World Economic Forum did most of the work for me without knowing so, because they've actually published a list. And maybe, Gabriela, if you could, maybe you could for a second share the screen with a list of soft skills of the World Economic Forum. And they're actually saying, yes, it's slide number 3. They're actually saying anywhere around the world, these are the skills that are in growing demand. This is where economies and countries and societies should focus on, because these are required for the future. Now, if you will look at that list on the left side, analytical thinking and innovation, active learning, creativity, originality, okay? Many of the things here, most of the things are not things that you can actually learn, be taught at school doing exercises. It requires a different mindset. It requires a different practice. It's not a matter of knowledge. It's really a matter of practice and experiences. Gladly, again, the Israeli childhood actually fosters almost all of that list very well, again, in my opinion. The big question, and this is what Chutzpah, the book, is about, is how do you take these mindsets that exist here in Israel and actually apply them to other countries, and not just countries, organizations, teams, communities. Okay, we don't have to think at a scale of an entire country. We can even think at the scale of a business organization. And that's what the book is about. So through the story of Israel, and Israeli childhood, I actually unpack the soft skills that are critical for the future and provide concepts and principles on how to apply them.
Oh,
That's amazing.
That's really amazing. Go, Luciana.
No, that's really amazing. I really need to read all the book just to tell people that you can read through Kindle, because it's too hard to find today. But we hope to have it in Portuguese soon, right, Inbal?
Yeah, so the book was published, this version is the original version. It was published by HarperCollins. It's a US publisher. It's of course available on Amazon and in English, in Kindle and Audible, and on Amazon in English. But it also came out in, maybe Gabriela, can you press the next slide? Because I prepared a picture of I'm very proud of the fact that it was already translated into all of these languages. So Taiwan was first, and then Korea, and then Japan, and recently it was released in China. And I'm actually in the middle of the book release in China, in different districts in China, which I'm doing from Israel. And so I definitely, and there are more languages coming out soon. I definitely hope we'll find a good publisher in Brazil to translate and release the book in Portuguese. I would love that.
We are on the same page. We are hoping for that also. We are almost at the end, and I just want to do one question from the chat that Ali Tarek did for you. He thanked you for your presentation, and it's very connected to what we do here. So he asks, what do you believe is the best way for Brazilian angel investors to access the Israeli startup market?
Okay, so like I showed before, there's a lot of money coming into the Israeli tech ecosystem. There's always need for more because there's a lot of innovation and startups, but it's a competitive landscape for investors. That's one, of course, on the good deals, right? So that's one thing to understand and to set expectations right. Now, how do you overcome that? I think there are two main strategies that I would pursue. The first is by making clear what is, if there is, and you should find one, an added value to the dollars that you can bring. Not necessarily as an individual angel investor, because that's sometimes difficult, but it could be, you know, if you're grouped or with your connections or with companies that you have connections with or you've led other businesses, because we saw on the first slide, there are a lot of great things in the Israeli tech ecosystem. There's one thing that we don't have, one critical thing, and that is a market. Because Israel is a tiny market of 9 million people, a Hebrew-speaking market. It's just a non-relevant market for the Israeli innovation and startups. And so what Israeli startups are looking for more than anything are actually the clients. And if you're capable of creating, okay, the right way of connecting between them and clients and potential clients, by saying, and we can also bring you funding, that's the best way, because that's an added value to the dollar. So that's one strategy I would pursue. And the second one is finding or connecting with the right, I would say, communities, groups, however you want to call it, person, I don't know, okay, fund, depending, of course, on the case, in Israel. Because of the fact that the market is so small, we almost all know each other, okay? I said it's 400,000 people, the entire tech ecosystem. It's not large, it's small. We all know each other. It's very easy here to get a connection to an investor. Very easy. So if you know you want to meet someone, it will happen within, I don't know, 48 hours, 72 hours. You will find a lead to that person. Everything moves very, very fast. And so sometimes for outside investors, this become a competitive disadvantage. If they don't have someone that is facilitating and representing them and helping them moving fast from here, it's more challenging. So this is why, by the way, many of the American funds, which are the largest in the world, okay, and their brand is very clear, and any Israeli entrepreneur would like to be funded by them, they still have offices here in Israel because they want to be able to move quickly and find the right deals quite rapidly. I always say that the time is the same time, but there are two different clocks sometimes. And the clock is ticking much more rapidly for an Israeli startup than for investors from Asia, let's say. I'm representing the Vietnamese investor, a huge Vietnamese conglomerate. They're used to a different rhythm of time than the Israeli startups. And so you have to kind of connect these two clocks together. So that would be my second strategy, to have someone, somehow a receptor here in Israel to help you navigate the ecosystem.
Thank you. We love to hear that, right, Luciana? Because this is what we are trying to do for so many years, because we really understand that it's all about people and all about connections and all about what we bring to the table. Money is a commodity. We all know that. We are coming to the end. Thank you so much, Inbal, for all of that. We love talking to you, love connecting to you. We hope your book will be here in Brazil soon and that we can meet in person sometime in the future in Israel or here in Brazil. Thank you so much. Luciana wants to give some advice also. And with that, we end our event.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Inbal, for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's going to be recorded, so don't lose time and access again. But we have more questions to you, and in the future, it's going to be in person. Thank you so much, Inbal.
Thank you. And thank you to all our teams, right? To Daniel, to Gabriela, to all people that helped us a lot in putting this together.
Goodbye, everyone.
תודה רבה. צ'או.
להתראות.
Bye bye.
Ciao, ciao.